Alrighty, good evening everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Board Hitters and Bourbon podcast, proudly presented by the Daily Gallop. My name's Joe Wulffe, and I'll be your host for this evening. On tonight's agenda, first and foremost, I'll be discussing another Kentucky Derby prep race. This is going to be the Grade 3 $250,000 Sam F. Davis Stakes, running a mile and a 16th at Tampa Bay Downs in Oldsmar, Florida. This is carded as race number 11. The approximate post time for the race is 5:29 p.m. Eastern Time. Following the preview of the race, I'll be giving selections for the field, and then I'll be finishing off the evening with a bourbon review of... This is the bourbon for tonight. For those of you, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. This is Evan Williams Single Barrel Bourbon. It's the 2011 bottling. It's a very interesting bourbon. It's a good way to start off the evening, or at least start off doing this on YouTube, as it's a very nice beginner bourbon. Before I kick things off, a little introduction on myself for those of you who are new to watching this. As I said before, my name's Joseph Wulffe. I am one of the feature writers and podcast host for the Daily Gallop website. This specific thing, Board Hitters and Bourbon, spawned off of a feature that had originally premiered on Anonymous Racing called The Race of the Week. And it's a really solid feature. Usually what I do is I pick a stakes race, not always a stakes race, but generally a stakes race that interests me at a track across the country. I go ahead, I preview it, and then afterwards I go ahead, provide selections for it. And usually I conclude the evening with a bourbon review. In addition to doing the Board Hitters and Bourbon podcast for the Daily Gallop, I also do a feature called the Kentucky Derby Futures Index. For those of you who are not familiar with that, go on over to the Daily Gallop. It's the Daily Gallop, GALLOP.net, and you can check that out. In that, I preview or provide a little bit of a review on my top 5 Derby contenders that I'd be buying into. Those are the horses that I think have the best chance at least hitting the board in the Derby, as well as the 5 Derby contenders, those that have points right now, that I'm not really buying into. Those would be horses that I would not be wagering on once the Derby arrives, provided they make it into the field. I also do photography for the Daily Gallop. I've been a credentialed photographer at Arlington Park over the past 2 years, and you can find my work both on Twitter, at Wheaton Bourbon Guy, or it's at WHTNBOURBONGUY. That's both on Twitter and Instagram. So now that we've gotten this out of the way, let's go ahead and kick things off. As I mentioned, it's a really nice race here. There is one very, very heavy favorite, and this is going to be the number 4 Independence Hall. He comes into this race with an undefeated record. He's 3 for 3 thus far. He is the 6-5 morning line favorite. The next closest horse in this field is the other undefeated horse. That is the number 6 Premier Star. He is 3-1 on the morning line. This race ultimately comes down to whether or not Independence Hall can handle a 2-turn route, as well as can he get back to the form that he displayed back in November in the Grade 3 Nashua, in which he absolutely blitzed the field and posted one of the highest, if not the highest, time form speed ratings for a 2-year-old at the time, with a 122 time form speed figure, an absolutely monstrous number for a horse that was just making his second career start. He did show some antics that I'll discuss in his most recent start. That was in the $150,000 listed Jerome Stakes. Those antics sort of led to him not having the greatest trip early on, but he did end up recovering and still beat the field somewhat easily, although he is a little bit immature. And if those antics and pre-race actions occur again, he could very well be beat. But we'll go ahead and start things off, as I normally do, with the top horse in here, with just going through post position order. So we'll look at the number 1. This is Aja Weed. He's a 3-year-old son of Curlin, trained by Kieran McLaughlin. He'll be ridden once again by Joel Rosario. He's making his 2020 debut on Saturday. And last time out, he was seen. He ran a respectable second place behind Shotsky in the Grade 2 Remsen Stakes at Aqueduct at the beginning of December, going 9 furlongs. He did earn a 1:10 time form speed rating for that effort, and that is the highest last out speed figure amongst the entire field. Now, he closed very, very well from the rear of the field on a day in which the track towards the end of the race card was extremely favoring towards those horses on or near the early lead. Thus, it is to say that it had an extreme speed bias. He actually nearly nailed Shotsky at the wire in the waning moments of that race, and his performance was somewhat backed up by Shotsky running an admirable second in the Grade 3 Withers at Aqueduct last Saturday. And then his overall form for Ajoweed was also flattered, as he had run fourth in the Grade 1 Breeders' Futurity in November behind Enforceable, who had returned to win the Grade 3 LeCompte Stakes at Fairgrounds back in January. He's been working out very well for Kieran McLaughlin down at Palmetto since the beginning of the year. Over the past 3 years, Kieran posts a 20% win rate with runners returning from layoffs of 46 to 90 days. And this is from a sample size of 356 starts. There are two major concerns about him. One is his running style. He is a grinding closer, and he does project to be towards the rear of the field early on in a race that may not have that much pace up front. In addition, he's cutting back in distance. This is a colt who, given his pedigree, wants to go, and given his past performances, this is a colt who wants to go 9 furlongs and further. The cut back to 8.5 furlongs does put him at a disadvantage in a field compared to those that can run closer to the pace. He's 4-1 on the morning line, but my guess is he's likely going to be bet down to the second choice by post time, so he'll probably go off at about 2-1 or 5-2. Ultimately, this colt is very, very talented. I don't like the cutback in distance for him. I think he's going to be able to run on. I actually think he probably could end up finishing second in this race, but overall he's going to be my third selection in the field. We'll keep on moving along to the number 2. This is Sole Volante. He is a 3-year-old gelded son of Caracanti, trained by Patrick Bianconi. He'll be ridden by Luca Panici. He ran an okay third place in the $100,000 Mucho Macho Man Stakes, which was run at a 1-turn mile at Gulfstream Park on January 4th. This was actually his first try in the dirt after previously having been campaigned on the turf for his first 2 starts. He did earn a very solid 108 time form speed rating, but he was never going to catch either Chance It or As Seen on TV in that field, as he really didn't make much of an impression on those 2 runners down the stretch late. His pedigree, to simply put it, is that of a turf horse. Both his sire and dam sire, quality French milers on the grass, and he's going to be trying 2 turns on the dirt for the first time, stretching out just slightly in distance. His works, if you take a look at the past performances, in particular I happen to use Brisnet, the works suggest that he's likely going to be at his best running on the lawn going forward. His dirt works are woefully slow. You take a look at his most recent works, his last 3, he ran a really sharp 7 furlongs down at Palm Meadows. He followed that up by an incredibly slow 4 furlongs in the dirt, and then finished that off with a 5 furlong turf bullet last time out on February 3rd. Now, Bianconi has struggled over the past 3 years, not only shipping in horses, but also running them in grade stakes. The prime example would be last weekend he ran Uncork the Bottle in the Holy Bull at Gulfstream Park. That horse really had no impression on that field. I'm going to be tossing him. We'll keep on moving along to the number 3. This is Albert Park. He's a 3-year-old son of Street Sense, trained by Michael Stidham. He'll be ridden by Pablo Morales. This is the Godolphin entrant for this race. He was a well-beaten second in the local prep for this race. This was the $125,000 Pasco Stakes. It was run at 7 furlongs on the dirt on January 18th. He finished 5.5 lengths behind Liam's Lucky Charm, who's not all that great of a horse. Albert Park never really made an impression on the leader, and it didn't help that he was pushed really wide by 2 rivals exiting the turn into the top of the stretch. Now, the 97 time form speed rating he did earn is rather slow for this colt, and he would need to improve significantly in order to make an impression in this race. The Pasco was run over an extremely speed-biased track, which may have contributed a little bit to Albert Park's inability to catch Liam's Lucky Charm, as well as the fact that this was his dirt debut, as he had begun his career racing on the poly track at Arlington Park. Then he ran over the synthetic course at Presque Isle Downs before finally contesting Grade 3 on the turf at Del Mar. Now, Albert Park has a very good pedigree that suggests handling a stretch out in distance to a two-turn route should be no issue whatsoever, and he actually might relish going longer. I know that there are some prognosticators that say that his 7-furlong effort wasn't all that good, but I think this is a horse that actually wants to go much further. Thus far, Michael Stidham's been incredibly hot at Tampa Bay, and he's been firing at a 19% rate from 180 starts with runners making the transition from sprint to routes. In addition, Pablo Morales is the top rider right now at Tampa Bay, and he does very well riding for Stidham. Over his past 21 mounts, he's won with 33% of them, hit the board 62% of the time, and he does very well riding in route races. Now, the connections obviously think very highly of Albert Park in order to wheel him back in just 3 weeks, but this is going to be a tough test for him. At 15-1 on the morning line, he's worth a play as a long shot, but I'm going to be using him underneath. So we'll keep on moving along to the number 4. This is the morning line favorite. This is Independence Hall, a 3-year-old son of Constitution, trained by Michael Trombetta. He'll be ridden by Jose Ortiz on Saturday. He's, as I mentioned, one of 2 undefeated runners in this field. He does exit an all-right finish when last seen winning a 1-turn mile in the $150,000 Jerome Stakes on New Year's Day. The 102 time form speed rating that he earned for that effort was a massive 20-point drop from his romp last November in the Grade 3 Nashua over the same course and distance. Now, last time out, he was quite fractious in the paddock, and he was acting very badly in the post-braid, and his pre-race antics likely contributed to breaking slowly at the start. He was able to quickly overcome that poor beginning, and he did take control of the race by the top of the final turn, and never looked back en route to a 4-length victory. Still, he did show signs of immaturity during that race like he did in the Nashua, so his mental state needs to be brought into question. He was shying away from the whip down the stretch in both of those races. Now, Saturday does mark his first attempt at a 2-turn route, and if he breaks slowly, he might find himself scrambling to get into a comfortable stalking position, as there are 1 or 2 other horses in this field that might be keen on dictating the pace early on. If he does return to his Nashua form, then he's squarely the horse to beat, but 6-5 morning line odds are far from enticing, and I think they're actually going to drop even lower by post time. Michael Trombetta, over the past 3 years, is 18% with runners that won their last race, and this is from a sample size of 330 starts. And then he has also had Independence Hall working lights out down in Oldsmar since the middle of January, including posting a 5-furlong bullet work on January 26th. Independence Hall is going to be my top selection. I really don't like taking chalk in these races, but unfortunately I don't see much of an alternative. But if he does act up in this, again, pre-race, then I think he quite possibly could be beat, and I would encourage bettors to look elsewhere or skip this race entirely. We'll keep on moving along to the number 5. This is No Getting Over Me. He is a 3-year-old gelding by He's Had Enough. He's trained by Gerald Bennett, and he'll be ridden by Sammy Camacho on Saturday. He ran 3rd last time out in the Pasco. He was a 1.5 lengths behind Albert Park. His 95 time form speed rating that he earned for that effort is fairly woeful, and he would need to greatly improve. He actually tried to shoot up along the rail during the stretch run, and it was simply outkicked by Liam's Lucky Charm. He's actually run a route race before when he made his maiden debut at 1 mile and 40 yards, when he won by almost 10 lengths over the main track at Tampa Bay Downs. His pedigree is all right for handling the stretch out back to a 2-turn route. And this gelding does project to be amongst the first flight of stalkers chasing after the initial leaders. He does show 1 sharp 5-furlong bullet leading up to this race, and Camacho's been riding quite well thus far at Tampa Bay Downs and for Gerald Bennett. This race, though, still is quite a step up in class for this young gelding, and that Pasco performance was less than inspiring, so I'm going to be tossing him. We'll take a look then at the number 6. This is Premier Star. He's the only other undefeated runner in this field, and he's the likely choice of many to upset Independence Hall. He's a 3-year-old colt by Tapiture. He's trained by Jorge Navarro. He'll be ridden by John Velasquez on Saturday. Last time out, he won by 5.5 lengths as the massive favorite in a $75,000 optional claimer for non-winners of 1, going 7 furlongs at Gulfstream Park. He really didn't beat much in that field. The 103 time form speed rating he earned in that effort is all right, but he would likely need to improve a bit to contend. This is going to be the first time trying a 2-turn route, or even a route for that matter, so there is that question that he's going to need to answer. His pedigree, well, his sire Tapiture was fairly accomplished, racing at distances between 8.5 to 9 furlongs. His dam sire Hold That Tiger was an okay European turf runner, but the dam was a low-level claimer throughout much of her career, and thus the jury's out somewhat as to whether or not he can handle the distance. Now, the colt is very fast. Premier Star, as suggested by the Timeform pace projector, it's suggested he'll be out in the lead early on and will likely have a bullseye set in his back by Independence Hall. Jorge Navarro over the past 3 years, he's been firing at a 22% rate from 32 starts for runners attempting a route for the first time. And the jockey switch from Irad Ortiz to John Velasquez is good, as Johnny V is a very solid route rider. In fact, he's been winning at a 26% rate over the past year. Now, my big question is, I'm not sure if he can beat Independence Hall when making this decent step up in class, but if Independence Hall has any pre-race issues, then then Premier Star might be able to get away with dictating the tempo of this race for a long time and still hang on for a piece late. He's going to be my second selection in this field. We'll move on to the number 7. This is Tiz Ride Time, a 3-year-old colt by Tisnow. Trained by Ian Wilkes, he'll be ridden by Julien Leperoux on Saturday. To put it simply, I'm not sure why he's here in this field. His recent speed figures, both according to Brisnet and Timeform, are abysmal. He's yet to try. He did try a 2-turn route last time out at Gulfstream Park, where he was soundly beaten by 7 lengths, finishing 4th in there. And then I really don't like this colt whatsoever. I'm just going to be tossing him, to put it simply. We'll move on to the final horse in the field. This is the number 8, Chapaloo. He is a 3-year-old colt by Flatter. He's trained by Arnaud Delacour. He'll be ridden by Daniel Centeno. He was last seen winning the Group 3 or Grade 3 Gray Stakes at Woodbine way back on October 27th. The race was run on the Tapeta, and it was run at 8.5 furlongs. He did take command of the race early on, as no other runners in that field wanted to dispute the pace, and thus he was able to set modest fractions throughout. He actually had a fairly significant lead turning for home, and then began to wander over the course as he either got bored or tired or both, and saw his lead rapidly diminish to just half a length by the wire as several of his rivals were closing on him quickly. The big question for him is he's going to be trying dirt for the first time on Saturday. His pedigree as a son of Flatter, Flatter was excellent on the dirt, but both his dam and dam sire were turf runners. Thus, it's unlikely he's going to take to the dirt, as he's already proved himself to have an affinity for both the grass and synthetic surfaces. Now, there are a couple things going in his favor. Arnaud Delacour has had an absolutely insane record thus far at Tampa Bay. When these past performances came out on Wednesday, he had been winning at a 35% rate, and he also had his runners finish in the money 23 out of 26 times. Even more so, Daniel Centeno, he's another one of the top jockeys riding thus far at Tampa Bay. And also, over the past 60 days, with 21 mounts, he's hit the board 90% of the time for riding for Delacour. Now, one thing that doesn't really work in this colt's favor is that he draws the far outside post, and it is a very short run-up to the first turn in this race. However, given the early speed that he's flashed in 2 of his 3 prior starts, he's likely going to be sent to the get-go to avoid being drawn or pushed wide into that first turn. And there is the possibility that he could either get up there and contest the pace, with the likes of Premier Star, or he could simply elect to take a little bit back, rate alongside Independence Hall, and see where he goes from there. Now, I'm not really convinced that he's going to find this surface to his liking, and the long layoff, it's been over 3 months since he's last been seen racing, is concerning, although Delacour has done well in the past with runners exiting 90-plus day layoffs. He's been winning at 29% rate and also hitting the board 60% of the time from 131 starts over the past 3 years. I would like to endorse this colt in this race. I just don't particularly care for him. I don't think he'll take to the dirt, so I'm going to toss him. And then we'll just go as a quick recap. My top pick in here, it's not a flashy pick. It's not a really good pick. It's going to be the number 4 Independence Hall. I just think he's simply the horse to beat if he can regain that Nashua form. If he doesn't act up, and if somehow that little bit of about a month layoff working down at Tampa Bay Downs has allowed him to get his head straight, where he shows some new signs of professionalism, then I think he's going to be really hard to come and catch turning for home, as he'll just simply overpower this field. My second choice would be the likes of the number 6 Premier Star. Maybe, just maybe, if Independence Hall isn't completely right in the head, or if he acts up to the point where it affects him negatively enough that he breaks poorly or just gets completely wiped out the start, then he could be the one who they have to come catch at the end. And then finally, my third choice is the number 1 Ajaweed. He's a really good horse. My only concern about him, obviously, is the cutback in distance, because given his grinding running style, although he's shown that he can run well against extreme speed biases and close well there, Tampa Bay Downs, the main track there, is one of those funky tracks where it tends to be speed favoring, especially on big race days. I just think the cutback in distance is not going to be to his benefit, and he might be too far back, too late, and be left with too much to do, such that he's only running for a minor award, maybe second place at best. If you like to find horses to use underneath in this race, I think the number 3 Albert Park, especially if he stays or goes off around his 15-1 morning line, is a nice play in here. He is going to need to step up in class, and he is going to need to demonstrate that his Pasco effort was not indicative of his true running style, and that he can handle a stretch out to a 2-turn route. But given his pedigree, given his connections, I think he's got a very good chance here. So once again, I want to thank those of you who joined me this evening for my preview of race number 11. This is the $250,000 Grade 3 Sam F. Davis Stakes. It is one of a fantastic series of stakes races at Tampa Bay Downs this Saturday. The approximate post time for this race is 5:29 p.m. Eastern Time, and it is a very crucial Kentucky Derby prep, awarding a series of 10, 4, 2, and 1 points to the top 4 finishers in here. Independence Hall looks to be the top choice, and the horse that everyone else is going to need to beat. If he can do that and win on Saturday, he'll make his name as one of the top Derby contenders going forward. So now that that's finished, let's turn our attention to the more fun stuff. This is going to be a bourbon review. So as I mentioned before, we're taking a look at this. This is the 2000, sorry, I'm not sure if this is going to be viewable. This is the 2011 bottling of Evan Williams single barrel bourbon. It's a very solid bourbon on here. This particular bottle that I have, if I look at the stats on the back, it was barreled on September 12th of 2011 and bottled on February 6th of 2019. So actually, it was bottled just over a year ago. The approximate proof on here is 86.6 proof, so it is a rather low proof on this one. And with a 7.5-year-old bourbon with a little bit of a lower proof, there is the bit of a concern there that it's going to be a little on the weaker side, but we'll go ahead, do a normal taste, and we'll see how it goes. So first things first, This is my Glencairn glass. The usual glass I just use for most of my tastings. Allows you to get a really good way to nose it, and then also ideal just for doing samplings and reviews. I've allowed this to sit for approximately the length of this podcast, so about half an hour. We'll go ahead and do the first nose. Now I should point out that Evan Williams is made by Heaven Hill. Heaven Hill is actually one of my favorite bourbon distilleries. They make some other good products like Elijah Craig, as well as Larceny and stuff like that. And a lot of these products do have signature noses as well as taste. In this one, you're getting a lot of classic bourbon notes in here. You're getting caramel, a lot of the sweet vanilla, a little bit of baking spices, because I believe that there is some rye in the recipe for this as to what the ingredients are. And then there's a lot of butterscotch in there, so it's a rather sweet smelling bourbon. We'll do one more. Yes, you definitely get caramel, vanilla, and butterscotch. So it sounds, it's basically as if you're making some really sweet like butterscotch cookies almost. So we'll do the first sip. So cheers to everyone. It's sweet. There's no way getting around it. It's a very sweet bourbon. You get a lot of caramel up front. There is a little bit of acetone in there, as it's a younger bourbon. If you get a bourbon that's probably in that 8, 9, 10-year-old range, that acetone taste does go away. Being that it's a lower proof and that there's been a lot of water added to it as it came out of the barrel, it's a little bit thin, but it's not terrible. We'll do one more taste. Definitely, you're getting your caramel on here. You get a little bit of vanilla. Unlike some of the other bourbons that I've reviewed, there's not as much oak in there. So it's an all right bourbon on here. The finish, a little bit fruity. It's not a particularly long finish. A little bit fruity, kind of like apple pie almost, and it's all right. I believe when I bought this, and I think they're on now to the 2012 edition of this. So it was put in. This was bourbon that was put in oak in 2012. However, you can still probably find this at some stores. I think I paid about $30, maybe a little bit less for it. It's a fine bourbon for beginners to start off with, and it's not particularly complex. It is a little bit sweet. As it's such a low proof, this is one that I would not recommend adding water to, as that's going to dilute it way too much to be even enjoyable. I wouldn't even say add any ice to it, and I definitely wouldn't mix this either. Just a good, nice, solid bourbon to sort of sink your teeth into if you're just starting off in bourbon, and it's a good one to sort of advance into a little bit of the more complex ones. So that was the 2011 Evan Williams single barrel, and then prior to that was the review of the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis Stakes at Tampa Bay Downs. I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight to watch this video, and also everyone else who is going to watch this video in the future. I want to wish everyone the best of luck playing the races, whether it's at home or over in Vegas for the NHC. Best of luck to you all, and thank you everyone, and I hope you all have a good night. I am going to post a outro scene on here, and that'll just simply have my contact information if you want to go ahead and give me a follow. If you liked what you saw in this video tonight, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, or go ahead and feel free to follow me both on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.